you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join Doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
In this episode, we will be discussing a more serious topic, but one that we definitely need to be more aware of. And that is the topic of learned helplessness. It's something that we hear about, something I learned many years ago in my training as a psychiatrist, and we think about it as something that just happens to patients or someone who is very depressed. And it is important to recognize how we actually act and make decisions based on learned helplessness at times. And I want to dive in straight to it. I'm here with my super co-host, Dr. Erin Hurley. And Erin, tell us, how would you define learned helplessness?
I've been thinking about this, and it's one of those where I feel like you can recognize it when you see it, and yet putting words to it, the first word that comes to my mind is victim. And in a victim mindset, we don't see a way out. We feel trapped. We feel like there's nothing that will help. And yet that may not always be true. And it's about patterns, right? What are we in a pattern that we've learned to be in, to accept our circumstances and have given up on the ability to make choices that would make a difference? And Joanne, I don't know, from a psychiatry definition, is there something you would like to add to that with your perspective?
Yes. And this term was coined by psychologist, I'm going to say his last name wrong probably, but Martin Seligman. And I remember clearly, so it's and you all might have heard these studies that are pretty famous of dogs who were placed in like cages. And in order for them to get food, they would have to tap into this pad or something like that. But they would get a small electric shock. They would get food, but after some time, they just stopped trying. And I'm probably butchering the studies that were a little bit like way more detailed than this. But that's the concept of trying something and always getting a negative response. And then at some point you just stop trying, right? So if you can think about it for yourself, have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, nothing changes? And then for us in medicine, we end up thinking of the system is too broken. I'm going to hear no if I ask for that. The demands are too great. So you just stop trying. So that's kind of how it can show up for us. So that's how I think about it. And there were other studies, really, actually, some done with babies and orphans and hospitals, and very, very sad stories. But it's like that, literally to the point of failure to thrive. So it is a serious topic that we need to learn about, and then understand that it's not just that kind of extreme. What have you seen, especially with the women in medicine that you coach, right? Like, how does learned helplessness shows up, and what have you seen kind of personally or professionally?
I actually see this more in the women I don't coach than in the women I work with. And the difference, I experienced it myself, my first 20 years in medicine, that victim mindset. I work so hard. No one appreciates me. It's hard to make a difference in this organization I work in. And yet, when I began working with my coach, I realized the power of my own choice, the power of getting out of that victim mindset and saying, what do you have control over? And what difference can you make? Even tiny little differences, and then can those add up to big change over time? And so I was able to witness that getting out of, again, what I usually call victim mindset myself into an empowered mindset in a very short period of time, about 4 to 6 weeks, so much so that my husband could see significant differences in me. And I was able to make big changes when I was coming home, how I was getting my work done. it pains me. And the reason I wanted to talk about this today, especially during Mental Health Awareness Month, is seeing outcries sometimes on social media from people you know. Sometimes, many times I've had these conversations with women in person when they're crying out. They're teetering on the edge of what they can handle. And yet then they stop. They don't get that help that they might need, whether that's, working with me as a coach, whether that's prioritizing themselves and getting their own mental health needs met, asking for help from their partner. And it just creates this pit in my stomach because I know we have more choice than we think. And when somebody doesn't have the ability to even have that awareness, oh, I can make a difference. No, you don't understand. I'm trapped in this situation. And I, as silly as it may sound, I just watched Moana 2 on an airplane when I was traveling recently. And one of the themes is there's always a way out. It may not be obvious. You just have to look, even if it looks impossible, there's always a way out. You just have to think outside the box, reach into some different part of you and believe there is a way out. And with learned helplessness, I think that belief, kind of like a candle, has been extinguished or down to the tiniest little flicker. And that has to be reignited into having some belief that it's possible for change.
That is so good. I was here taking notes of what you're saying. And you mentioned some of this already, but why is it important for us to recognize it and talk about it in our field?
It's so difficult right now in medicine for most people. I think that the numbers of burnout being close to 50% for primary care, women in medicine, emergency medicine being above 50%, even though there's maybe a small downtick in the percentages over the last year, still being around 50% is not great numbers for burnout, which goes along with depression, anxiety, sometimes, the serious topic of suicide. If we don't raise our awareness about what status am I in, then we don't have the ability to choose differently, to make change. And when we can share stories about, I was in a victim mode for most of 20 years. I saw so many other women in medicine. We would get together and we would complain about, oh, corporate medicine this, and this is what I don't have control over, and oh, my patients that. And when I started working on myself and getting coached to think differently and realize I was empowered, and then I would show up to these gatherings and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much you can do. And I had so much hope and optimism because I had not only become aware that I have choice, I had started implementing it and seeing the results. And so instead of showing up to join in the complaints and about what was going on in medicine, I was able to say, look at these things we can do and make the intentional decision. What conversations am I going to be part of? Who do I need to be around in order to fuel that part of me instead of allowing that little flicker of light and my empowerment to be squashed back down by the others who were feeling like there is no ability to change. And my hope is that by talking about it, we can then shift our focus to what can we change instead of what we cannot.
This is so neat. And it makes me think also of how, and we shared with that recent episode we did about mental health, also how often we struggle in silence and then we feel like there's something broken and we're not getting the help that we need. And learned helplessness can get us there. And there's that, it's important for us also in the sense that it isn't a weakness. It's usually a response to other things that are going on. But as high achieving women, we are actually most at risk for this invisible struggle. So it's that awareness, like you're talking about, is so important. And when we know better, we do better, and we can be role models for this as well.
And I think if we understand this is our brain's way of keeping us safe and protected, because in some circumstances it would not be safe to continue fighting against a system. And yet our nervous systems were created, many, many millennia ago. And the same threats that might have been life-threatening back then that our nervous system was programmed to help us, keep us protected and help us survive, it's different threats these days. So most of those threats we perceive are likely not life-threatening and might be even more damaging if we're not recognizing, oh yeah, this is just my brain's way of trying to keep me protected. Can I consider addressing it in a different way that might have a healthier outcome?
Yes, and something that I like to think of is, this is like the name calls it, learned helplessness. But then, like you said, we have choice, and maybe there are things that we can unlearn. So what are some practical steps that we can take to unlearn helplessness and kind of better reclaim that sense of agency?
We've talked so much about awareness. So number one is becoming aware of your circumstances and asking yourself a question. Is this really true that you don't have a way out, that you don't have any time at all to invest in yourself, that you are always burdened by patient care, child care duties, dealing with your household, etc.? Could you find 5 minutes for yourself? Is it really true that you have no capacity? And so really becoming aware, what state are you in? And then challenging your perception of that reality and asking, is this true? One is accepting responsibility. If I was showing up at the end of the day when I was working in primary care and in child abuse medicine, and I had used all of my energy stores at the office, and I came home completely depleted every day, then I needed to accept some responsibility to say, well, if you weren't putting anything in the gas tank all day, of course you're depleted. Would you do the same with your car? And if you were driving around on empty fumes all day and you ran out of gas, you were aware of that and you chose not to do anything about it. So how can we use that awareness and our own sense of responsibility to say, is it really everybody else's fault? What part of this can I own, right? I'm not talking about, of course, there's things we can blame on other pieces, corporate medicine or our boss or our circumstances. And yet, can we own what's ours to own and say, I wonder, get curious with yourself without blame, shame, and pointing fingers, just curiosity. I wonder what would happen if I put little bits of fuel into my energy tank throughout my day. Could I show up as a better wife and parent at the end of the day, instead of just accepting that grouchy me was just all they got at the end of the day because I had chosen to spend all of my energy at the office? So that's just one little example of when I started showing up differently because I learned differently. I actually tapped in to a new community, and Joanne and I are constantly talking about community and how they can either help you do more of what you want or keep you trapped. And when I became part of a new community, part of a personal growth and developing community, and invited a coach into my life, then that actually helped me find a community that challenged my learned helplessness, challenged my victim mindset, and said, do you want to try and experience something else? Let's give this a try. And with one tiny nudge in the right direction and 1% of change and another percent of change and getting more and more brave to try something new. And then am I getting a different outcome or not? So using something measurable. So I did something called a high performance indicator, which was a questionnaire that you answered all these questions and it gave you a readout on a score up to a level 5. And I was actually able to measure and say, okay, here's where I started in the low 4s. And with 3 months of coaching, what happened? And 6 months of coaching and 12 months of coaching, I could see all of these incremental changes adding up to big change. So part of it is not only being aware, but can you now measure something tangible? For my clients who are low in energy, I might say, can you just score yourself morning, noon, and night. Just write a number down. What's your energy level? And then make those changes to the recipe of your day, your week, your month, and see what are those changes doing to change your score. And if they're not changing it, what else can you do? And so again, taking those little tiny steps, lower the bar to what you need to do. What's one thing you can commit to? What's 1% change you can do? So lowering that bar and seeing what you can do to start pivoting out of that circumstance and then riding that momentum, celebrating those wins along the way in order to give you more momentum to make even more change.
This is incredible. I am so glad that we're having this conversation. I know that these are not always easy topics to talk about, but that's exactly why we need to talk about it. We need to bring this to the table, normalize the conversation, and remind ourselves of what we can control and think about it of how it could be showing up in your life. As women in medicine learn how helplessness can show up as feeling stuck, feeling discouraged, resigned, depleted. And like Erin is saying, check in and see where it's coming from and question the narrative and ask yourself where you do have some control, where you can create change, where you can shift your perspective and feel a little bit different. The reminder that these are things that we can unlearn. Some of it, unfortunately, is very wired in our brain. And this is why this work helps, because we can still reframe even when it shows up automatically in our brain. And of course, then the seriousness of how the extreme of this can affect our mental health, and the good formula that Erin gave us of always start with awareness. That's something that we'll keep on saying, and keep yourself in check. I like the accept the sense of responsibility without judgment, but rather a lot of compassion, because sometimes that's where our control is in our response, in it can definitely make us feel better. And then, of course, the community. And I'll add, celebrate when things do go well. That's how we really rewire our brain. And thank you for listening to this conversation, because it's so powerful. And Erin, tell me one other wisdom that we can keep in talking about these important topics.
There's often the feeling of isolation. If you're feeling like there's no hope for me, I'm just stuck, I just have to sit here in resignation to my circumstances. And if that's you, then my hope is somebody's going to reach out to you. So if you're feeling in a stronger state, don't forget to reach out to individuals. A quick text, a quick note, a quick phone call saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. Just wanted to check in. And if we can make that more of our norm when we do have capacity to check in with others, sometimes that may be what they need to hear. Oh, someone's thinking about me. Someone cares enough about me to reach out and check in. And that might be one little shift that they need to recognize people do care. They're not as alone as they think. And my hope is that together as a community, that what we share with our listener here on this podcast can inspire you and encourage you, no matter the circumstances that are going on around you. We can always make a difference in our own lives and each other's lives. And we can amplify that, add fuel to that fire, to the positive things that are going on, because with enough energy and motivation behind that positive energy, we can overcome things that seem dark and negative and overwhelming. So hang in there, and don't forget to take one little action to help out a colleague or a friend.
So good. I love our conversations and how much I learned from them as well. And hopefully you are enjoying this set of interviews that we're having lately. And stay tuned, because our next episode, we will be interviewing Dr. Rebecca Thompson, the author of the book Held Together. And we'll be talking about the power of stories and how we can use our experiences to show up as better doctors and better humans overall. So stay tuned. It's coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.